All right, this is Mr. Williams. I am re-recording the book two, part one, Flipped Classroom, because apparently last time I recorded it didn't have any audio, and that's kind of frustrating. So I'll try to zip through this. Anyway, book two, part one, lines one through. Um, Here is an image of Satan with stares of all the demons looking up to him. This is Satan as he is pictured at the very beginning of book two, sitting high on his throne. Now, having portrayed Satan in book one as defiant and vengeful, but also somewhat heroic, and perhaps even sympathetic, Milton uses the first half of book two to establish Satan's dishonesty and hypocrisy. But this is quite subtle, and it doesn't come off as obvious, but a careful reader can see how sneakily deceptive he is. Just an image, another image. Here we have Satan high on the throne of royal state. So in the first 10 lines of book two, it's Milton establishing that he's up there. Um, Oops, I went a little too fast. But in these opening lines, Milton's using irony and paradox to undermine Satan's seeming majesty. Um, Milton would have considered the top spot in hell as the lowest point in the moral universe. So by saying he sits high in hell, it's like damning with faint praise. Um, Satan is the first of the demons to speak at the demonic consultation. He claims that nature, specifically the fixed laws of heaven, from line 18, have chosen him to be their leader, which is, of course, ironic. The fixed laws in heaven is what he rebelled against. So, uh, in this opening speech by Satan of Book 2, Milton has Satan use elevated diction to make him seem more powerful and secure, and thus disarm his minions, the other demons. There's, as I just mentioned, the dramatic irony of Satan using the phrase the fixed laws in heaven to justify his position of authority. Satan continues. More verbal irony comes from the idea that the unfallen angels are inferior. And then moving on into lines 35 through 42, in these lines, Milton has Satan use repetition of the word firm and alliteration with firm faith and prosperity to further his linguistic, or to use his linguistic control to further his control. It's situationally ironic for an individual to be securing his own power while asking others for advice in a consultation of how to proceed. And that's the complexity of what's going on. Moloch is the first of the demons to answer his question of whether overt war or through secret guile they should respond to the devastating defeat that the demons have experienced. And Moloch is described as the fiercest, strongest spirit, and his argument is very simple for open war. Moloch's understatement in lines 70 through 71, where he says, "Perhaps the way seems difficult." Now, he's just had a smashing defeat. So he's kind of attempting to chide those who are listening to him to man up, so to speak. But I think it creates unintended irony when in line 74 through 75, he says, "Descent and fall to us is averse." He's using this, attempting to persuade the fellow demons to rise up and fight against heaven, but the irony of the descent and fall is adverse to us. He didn't see that the first time. Here's another one, just his alliteration and assonance, masking his his denial. So there, I got a little bit ahead of myself. Here we have Moloch encourages his fellow demons to join him and shows lack of imagination. He is followed by Belial, and Belial is described by Milton as his voice was false and hollow, though his tongue dropped manna, or his character is false and hollow. Um, Belial pretends to praise Moloch, dismisses the possibility of revenge flat out, and much more thoughtfully proposes, or paradoxically, that we must exasperate the almighty victor to spend all his rage. Now, this isn't his final argument. This is just something that he heard people will say, and he is actually going to be arguing against this. And essentially, he dismisses two of Moloch's argument. Belial says, if we do nothing, at least we won't be defeated again. So that's one argument against the Moloch's proposed course of action. And then Belial shows his greater imagination by arguing that a second defeat could be worse than what they're experiencing right now. In lines 184 through 203, we get to Belial's, the core of his argument. And here he says, we cannot go to war, and we can't sit around and try to conceive of a plan to deceive the Almighty, because he's omniscient. He sees us doing this right now. There's no way we can have a surprise sneak attack. So it's pointless, says Belial, for us to try to fight. Moving on, he extends this same thought by mocking those, and he says, essentially, in doing this, maybe God will relent in time. If we're patient and sit here in hell and just take our punishment, maybe we'll grow accustomed to hell. And he even points at maybe we'd be forgiven. But so his speech isn't really a call for anything, and it doesn't unite the demons that hear it. Mammon is the next to speak, and his argument is more sophisticated than Moloch's, and almost does win the day. He echoes Satan's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven by really emphasizing the harm, the trouble, the burden of his servitude, or of the demon's servitude to God. He rails against it and says, they'd have to offer the servitude even if they were allowed back into heaven. So that's countering Belial's argument. Moving on, Mammon says we can do better here. And then in line 270, who knew that there's precious gems and gold in hell? And who conceived of that? So essentially, Mammon is saying there's no need for war. We'll just outdo heaven right here. Milton just used some epic simile to say that, Mammon's argument is quite persuasive, and the demons be persuaded before Beelzebub sees what's happening in lines 299 through 309, and he puts the preconceived plan into place. This is something that he and Satan had talked about back in book 1. So Beelzebub's argument is essentially, he starts by, ironically describing his audience, the demons, as offspring of heaven while they've turned it. It's essentially denial of present reality. He asks his audience to consider how absurd it is that they are even, discussing this idea. In other words, we're considering a false choice. So says Beelzebub. The idea that going to war or planning a secret attack against heaven, it's a false choice. There's something third. And that's when he says, what if? What if we find some easier enterprise? And here he begins to talk about there is a place, this rumored creation of Earth and a new race of people called human beings, going on to propose that what if we, oops, there it is, there's Earth, and there's the new race. He's saying, what if we get revenge on God by damning them? Oh, I'm just noticing that it looks like there's a hurricane right at New Orleans in this globe. Maybe this was Katrina. I don't hope not. Beelzebub next proposes, whom shall we send? He does this, the dark, unbottomed, infinite abyss. He clearly doesn't want to have a lineup of people volunteering for this. So Beelzebub describes, what honestly he doesn't know. He doesn't know what the terrain between hell and earth is. But he describes it in very menacing, dangerous terms. Of course, after all of that, Milton tells us that all sat mute, pondering the danger. So Beelzebub was able to freeze the demons by kind of challenging their courage. And it is just as they had planned it, Satan, who, you know, volunteers. And it's a kind of a false volunteering. And this is important because in book 3, we'll see another scene of volunteering where Satan's volunteering is going to be compared and contrasted with the son's. But Satan also concludes his speech, lines 465, 466, that this dangerous task, this enterprise, none shall partake with me. This cements, Milton wants to use this to cement the idea that he is not a quote, like team player. He's narcissistic, he is selfish, and that he's not seeking out revenge for all the demons for what they've lost. For him, this is personal. And that's it. I'll be quiet and I'll just move to the slideshow.